So I did a pretty deep dive into the COVID contact tracing app or the COVID exposure notifications app that is being rolled out by Apple and Google with the federal and provincial governments. And after looking into it, I've done a complete 180. I was originally not going to get it, but now I probably will because it might actually be even more private and secure than how they do contact tracing right now. So I don't see a reason not to, especially again if safety is my top priority here and being private, um, which I think this balances pretty well. But we'll get into it so you can actually see for yourself. Also, if at the end of this video and you don't and if you disagree with me, and you actually have actual knowledge on this, please reach out and I'd love to hear your views on this because I want to make sure that the audience is as informed as possible. Because I mean, again, I originally started off in a completely different place than I am now, so I can see both ways. But if it's actually logical, so this contact tracing app, which will be called COVID Alert in Ontario, which releases on July 2nd, and the purpose of this app is to let everybody who has it installed know whether or not they've been exposed to somebody who has tested positive for COVID and also had the app installed at that time. And there are also some conditions to this as it doesn't always record every single interaction between people, even if you do have the app installed. So the number one critique I would have of this is that I don't want anyone really recording my movements, and I really don't want that going to the government. More than it already is today. Again, there's always that argument of where we are right now. And if you take that argument, it's that we can already be tracked and that nobody needs this app to do that. So there's no point on even making that argument to not use this app. Now, with this app, it doesn't even track your location. So that's not even an argument. It's pretty great as far as that goes. All it does is actually keep a store of which devices you've been in touch with. And you can't even figure out which device you've been in contact with. What happens is that your device actually produces a code, and the code changes every 20 minutes. And all that happens is that your phone keeps track of which devices you've been in contact with. And after 14 days, that record gets deleted. And that's the great thing about this, is that that record never leaves your phone. The government never gets that. The only thing the government ever gets is the codes of the people who were tested positive for COVID, and only if those people agree to it. There's no forcing on any of this on anybody, and that's the great thing. Now, I don't really see an argument against it anymore, as Google and Apple have done a great job on making sure that the government doesn't get a hold of this information. And Apple and Google don't get this information either, which is great. It all just stays on your phone, which makes me feel a lot more comfortable. Although, again, your phone's not the most secure thing in the world. Apple's is pretty good, but again, there's always a risk. But again, all these codes are randomized, so it would be extremely unlikely for someone to actually take your phone and figure out who you've been in contact with. There are way more risks for someone to actually get a hold of your phone than there is for this one, and there's a lot easier things they could do to gain from it than trying to figure out how to crack this code. It's not worth it. You'd have to be a pretty special person for someone to spend the time to do that. But as far as the records being held by this app, it's not really a concern if someone actually gets a hold of your phone. So there's very little risk of your data actually getting out there. Now, the way it works and how you find out if you have been exposed to somebody with COVID is if someone else who has COVID and has the app, who's been close to you while the app has been running, decides to publish that result. And what happens is every so often, all the codes of the people who have tested positive for COVID get sent to your phone, and if you have a match, then you get the notification. So that's how it works. Only the codes of the people that have been infected get sent to the server that is held by the government, and then that gets sent to your phone, and then it gets run against that. So that way, everything is kept safe on your end. And this allows you to keep all the data on your phone and keep you private and secure, which is great. As secure as you are now with everything else that you're doing. So as far as COVID alert goes, it really doesn't increase your insecurity more than the basic apps that are already on your phone, especially if you already leave Bluetooth open on your phone. Also, I mean, just in reality, there's probably like 5 or 6 easier ways to track your movements through your phone than to use this app that anybody who gets a hold of your phone can get easier access to. So again, that argument for not using this COVID app isn't really a real one. So what happens if you do get a notification saying you've been exposed to COVID is that you get an instruction from the local public health unit and they direct you on what to do. And we'll see what happens then when we get it. But most likely it'll tell you to get tested and it'll direct you where to go and give you the hours to do that and probably also tell you to self-isolate. But we'll see when that happens and when it releases on July 2nd. But either way, again, all of this is secure, and that's my main point with this. I'm not going to get too deep into that because I have only seen a few things with it. Now, when you run the app and you do get a positive hit for saying you have been exposed to somebody with COVID, that doesn't always mean you have COVID. Now, the thing is with Bluetooth is that it can be picked up through walls sometimes. But COVID doesn't get transmitted through walls. So if you're in a building that has a bunch of people closely together but separated into different rooms, then you could get a false positive as far as being exposed to it goes. So whether or not COVID alert actually registers your interactions with people who have the app as well is dependent on a few things. One of those things is that, again, you both have the app installed. Another one of those things is dependent on the Ontario government, as Google and Apple have set it up this way, as is some of these other exceptions as well. Now, the Ontario government has the choice to set up in increments of 5 minutes of how long you need to be with somebody before the COVID alert registers the interaction. That could be anywhere between 5 minutes and 30 minutes. So whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, that is all dependent on the Ontario government. And also, another thing that's also dependent on what the Ontario government chooses is how close you have to be to somebody, aka the Bluetooth signal strength. And that will help with some of the issues I mentioned earlier, such as Bluetooth signals going through walls. But the way it seems to be recommended is that you set the strength for about 6 feet, which makes sense given that that's apparently the spread of COVID. But some governments are making the strength cover a longer or shorter distance, dependent on whatever they decide. So let's just say you've been with somebody for less than 5 minutes and you were further than 6 feet apart, then most likely the app won't pick that up. But of course, there's always exceptions and it's up to the government. But the way this is set up is that if you're with somebody for less than 5 minutes, the app isn't going to pick it up no matter what. So, I mean, this isn't the most helpful thing in the world. But again, we're trying to respect people's privacy here and we're just doing our best. And I mean, you don't want to overload the system as well. Now, where the federal government steps in is they actually house the database where all of the codes of the people that have tested positive for COVID are. So that could be sent across the entire country because we do plan on using the system for when we do resume flights in the future across the country. So it makes sense to have a national database for this. And again, the only codes that are housed in this database are the ones of those who have tested positive for COVID and have agreed to it. And these are anonymized codes. So it's very hard, if not impossible, to match them up to a device. And really, if they do crack the code, all they do is find out that you had COVID, which I mean isn't great. But again, I think that's not going to be the most private thing in the world for you. Especially if you have to take off work for 2 weeks. Now, up until this system that Google and Apple have put together, governments have been using credit card data and GPS data, like location data, to figure out who's been in contact with who in order to do contact tracing. Now, this obviously raises some huge privacy concerns, and there are human rights groups such as Amnesty International looking into this. But a lot of these countries are rolling back these systems in order to put in the new system that Google has put together, because that's just the better way to go. It keeps everyone safer and keeps everyone anonymous, and it gives people more freedom. Google's done its best to make sure that this system doesn't get made mandatory in countries, which is great because, again, it should be a choice for everybody. But again, I've landed on a completely different spot than where I was originally. I wasn't going to get this, but I'm like 99% sure I'm going to, unless something crazy comes out before I do. And then again, I can just delete it, and then once I do, I stop getting tracked. And if you don't believe that, then you shouldn't believe anything else that you use your phone for. You're already being tracked if that's the case, if you believe that. So just kind of give an overview. The way the system works is that the Ontario government put together the actual app, the system that keeps everybody private and actually sends the notifications for COVID alerts was put together by Apple and Google. And then the database that houses all the codes of people who chose to share them, who have tested positive for COVID, was built by the federal government. So you can see how there's a lot of disintermediation here. And with this system, it keeps everyone safe and it allows more freedom, and it actually makes it effective. And a national database ensures that everybody who has the app gets all the codes of everybody in the country who have tested positive for COVID. As again, when we resume domestic travel, that will be something we have to watch out for. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense just to keep it to a province by province basis as far as that goes. But in accordance with provincial health regulations and everything else, it makes sense that the province builds the app. So, I mean, it's a pretty effective and efficient system. Again, my only critique on the effectiveness is how often it registers contacts. But again, that's just a limitation of technology and how private you want to make sure everyone is still. So it's understandable. So some of you may be asking why we even need to use technology with this at all. And I can understand that, but to actually do contact tracing manually, it's a pretty big task when it's something like COVID. Never mind, I would say it's even less secure and private than the app that we get access to now, which is COVID Alert, or on July 2nd. Because when you do it manually, you're going to have to tell somebody, and that's going to get recorded somewhere where people have access to it, that all the people you've been in contact with. And I mean, you're not even going to remember all the people you've been in contact with either. So that's why I'm not going to complain about the app only registering interactions that are longer than 5 minutes. So, because I mean, there's no way every person is going to remember every person they've ever been in contact with. Never mind, they're not going to know them. So I think the method that we're going with Google and Apple and the Ontario and federal governments is the right way to go. Just on that basis alone. Because I mean, I don't see how that's more secure if you actually are trying to keep people safe. If your intention isn't to keep people safe or yourself safe, then I don't know what the argument is with you. That's just an entirely different argument. But if your intention is to keep people safe and yourself safe, then there's really no reason not to use this app. It's been built in the best way possible that I can see. And honestly, for all the conspiracy theorists out there, if the government wanted to create a database of everyone you ever interacted with, or the UN or anybody else like that, they wouldn't use Google, they wouldn't use Apple, they would use the telecoms. The telecoms, they have way more leverage over. Google and Apple have a lot more power than them. The telecoms will play ball. It's almost assuredly in almost every country in the world, the telecoms would be the better way to do this, and you could do it without anybody ever knowing. Versus making them install an app. Like, you can get way more, it'd be way more effective just to go through the telecoms to try to accomplish what these conspiracists think is the government's trying to accomplish here. It just doesn't make any sense. You could do it a lot easier ways without anyone ever knowing, and you could track a lot more people than, again, relying on an app that you have to install yourself that people actually know exists. So That isn't a concern to me, and I don't understand why it would be concerned to other people. Again, my whole take on this is that been completely changed after actually looking into it. I mean, I looked out really deep into it. I didn't go into all that I actually found out about this. I'd be here for probably another hour. But I'm going to put some links below in the description. So be sure to check them out if you're curious and you want to make your own assessment. But if you do find some points that kind of go against this, and you do find that the app is not as secure as I'm led to believe through all the information that's out there, please reach out, because I mean, I want to make sure everyone's safe and private. Um, Again, that's the whole priority with this, and I do think this is better than pretty much every alternative I've ever heard of when it comes to contact tracing, whether it's manual or technology wise. Um, this seems to be really well done, so I'm a lot less concerned than I was before. I mean, there's always exception, like there's always possibilities of something going wrong, but again, I think this is pretty well done. And honestly, the incentives for Google and Apple to get this right are really high. It's widely suspected that they're trying to get into healthcare, that they have been for a while now, and this is the best way to build up trust, and it'll pay off huge in the long run, more than whatever short-term gains they'll get out of COVID. Um, this the payoff of actually putting in this app, which didn't actually cost that much, I can imagine, uh, will pay off for years to come. So I mean, that's really the only incentive that Google and Apple need to do this. It's just they want to get in the healthcare game, whether it's consumer devices like the Apple Watch or you want to house healthcare data like Google does, because Amazon's getting into this market and they know they have to compete against them in the long run. Um, but but anyways, I think that addresses all the points. But I mean, again, if you find something actually substantial, please let me know, and I'd love to address it or include it in our coverage, because I feel like this is going to be something that's brought up a lot, similar to the masks. I just kind of hope everyone approaches this with accurate information. I did my best here. I looked at a lot of information. I looked at the code that was released by Apple and Google. It all looked pretty good to me from what I saw. Um, but again, I'm going to link to it and please check it out. But anyways, thank you so much for listening, and everyone please just stay safe. That's what matters most. So anyways, have a good one.